It's funny. It's like a conversation about Rourke to distinguish the difference between transvestite and transsexual. But yeah, that.
In the mid-80s, Mickey Rourke was Hollywood's favourite tough guy. He shot to stardom in movies like Angel Heart, 9.5 Weeks and Wild Orchid, where he met his beautiful pin-up wife, Carrie Otis. However, after a series of box office flops, the ex-Miami gang member has turned his back on Tinseltown and returned to his first love, boxing. I went over to Mickey's gym in LA to see if I could go the distance with the man that the press have dubbed Mental Mickey.
I'll do what I want to do, whether it's off the wall or not. Now, I made some mistakes, and I've told so many people in Los Angeles to kiss my ass and they go fuck themselves that I'm basically blackballed here. I'll be real honest. I'm never, ever going to be a caliber fighter of James Toney. You know what I'm saying? I know that. I've come to terms with that. But, you take Alec Baldwin and Daniel Day-Lewis and Kevin Costner and all them, you put me in a room with, put me in something with those guys, I'll eat their asshole.
My name is Todd, and today I'm being joined again by Alec.
Yes, sir. Good to be here again.
Today we're going to be talking about the works of Mickey Rourke, an actor that before recording this podcast I did appreciate as an actor and as a performer, but now that I've done research and I've looked into it for this specific podcast, I've actually been able to really, for me, get into what about Rourke that works for a lot of people, but I've also been able to kind of intellectualize what works for me. The appeal, I guess I should say, because he's a very, obviously an appealing actor for people for various reasons. I would really like to talk about the change of perspective for myself. And Alec, I know that you're a huge fan of Rourke, and
yes,
you're actually the progenitor of this idea, which is delving into this actor first. Can you tell me why you would want to do it?
Yeah, it started for me when I first saw Philip Andre Rourke Jr. Actually, I had just bought the book Falling Angel by William Yortzberg. I came across this randomly at Bookman's here in Tucson, and I read that book, and the book is just fantastic, and Yortzberg turned out to be one of my favorite authors to this day. And it's this dark, gritty, terrifying, also humorous, voodoo world that Yortzberg lays out. And so as soon as I read the book, I needed more. I wanted everything I could find from that world, and I found somehow, I think it was on the internet, early days of the internet, this is probably mid-90s, I found out that it had been made into a movie, Angel Heart, and I rented that, once again, Blockbuster Video, VHS.
Another shout out to Blockbuster.
Absolutely. Anyone who doesn't have Blockbuster now doesn't quite know about those days, but it was a lot of fun walking around that store. And
I would like to talk a little bit about Blockbuster for
Let's
a
do
minute,
that.
only just because we talked about it in the first podcast with Fargo, and back in the day, obviously we used to have a rental system where you would go and rent physical media, that being VHS tapes, and eventually DVDs, which you can still do now. It's more of a little privatized, very specific market that it finds itself into. But back in the day, the only way you could really watch movies outside of the theater was to go to places like Blockbuster or your local rental store, and you could watch these videos. And the only way that you were able to kind of discern what the movie was about, if you never saw the trailer, was by the box.
That's right.
And so during this time, is the late 80s and the early 90s, VHS box art was, there's a whole art to it, and I think there's a lot to be said there that I think people can get into. It's the same thing with books, but movies obviously are a different thing.
And the description, there was a paragraph.
Yeah, you get a
describing
little,
the movie.
it's like a DVD box. A DVD. I don't even think they really put much effort into those anymore, but because trailers and the internet do all that stuff for you.
Yeah.
But so there was a whole culture surrounded around video shops and video rentals. Quentin Tarantino came out of that whole culture. He's an embodiment of that culture, which is consuming the art form of film. And I got to see a lot of really cool movies thanks to Blockbuster, and I think it's and other smaller places, but Blockbuster, Hollywood Video. There's Casa Video
out here
local, which is still open, which is great. I love Casa. I have a membership to Casa. I think it's great to be able to go and it's a little weird actually to go back and start renting.
It's fun.
It is fun, but at the same time, I'm like, well, could I watch this? Could I just stream this online? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I know that there's something special to the whole experience. It's a ritualistic experience that, you know, is very human. So that I did want to talk a little bit about Blockbuster just a little bit.
Another thing about Blockbuster, it's great for dates.
Yeah.
Like if you had a girl that you were into and you took her into Blockbuster, you guys could kind of walk around and like make fun of movies together. Say, ooh, this one looks kind of good. Are you into it, like something scary, something funny? You know,
point of fact, I think you could watch any old show from the 90s and there's at least one or two scenes where they're spending time casually looking through a video shop.
Or like a record store. And they're kind of on different, maybe walking through different aisles and catching each other's eyes, and we got a montage with a song in the background, you know.
Yeah, and that's a culture that we miss out on because there's no physical interactions anymore in the world, and now we get everything from the internet. So I could, you know, have all of the experiences of watching stuff at home without having to deal with other people, and there's some appeal to that, but there's also, you know,
there's an isolating nature about it.
Yeah, we live in a very isolated culture. We live in this island culture where people are very isolated. So the Blockbuster and places like that were great for bringing people together, and
you can talk to the weird guy who worked there.
Yeah, now that I think back, I actually, for a summer, I worked at a video place for a little while, and that was so fun. It was so kooky and weird. You know, I remember I watched Clerks when I was younger, and I really thought it would be fun to work at a gas station, and I have worked at a gas station. It's not fun, but working at a video place was a lot of fun.
Right.
So that I think talking a little bit about that from my experience brings us to the early 90s, which is, you know, when I was kind of getting a feel for Mickey Rourke. I knew he existed, but because of the nature of the actor and because of the nature of the person, you didn't see a lot of him.
No.
And that led to some of his appeal, mostly in the late 80s, because we will get to the stuff that he was in the mid 90s and the late 90s and the early 2000s. And
trash.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure a one-word description of what he did.
Couple gems in there, maybe.
There was some, diamonds in the rough, perhaps maybe he wrote some of those, but
yeah.
Mickey Rourke, he's such a fascinating character to me because I think that he's a real embodiment of like the male experience, I feel like, in the world, which is that he's a byproduct of so many cultural and societal things, and what he went through in his life, I feel like, is also a byproduct not only of the Hollywood system but also just the world system in general.
Yeah.
And so I think I'd like to go just to start off from the beginning, which is that Mickey Rourke was born in New York in 1952. That's what his Wikipedia page says. I don't know if that's accurate, only because Rourke is notorious for not wanting to talk about his age.
Yeah, like he said anything from 55, I think, to 57. So I think,
right.
I think 52 is probably the accurate number.
I think that's I think that's like the average median or whatever for the dates that he's given, and I think that really talks to about Rourke, which is that from day one I feel like he's always been the person who doesn't like to be labeled. He doesn't like to be put into a box. And so in Hollywood, when you have an actor who, you know, your age is important, and it's important for men have a longer expiration date than women. Everybody knows about this. If you're a woman over the age of 35, you're either a mother or a grandmother, or you play a witch. That's a common joke, and it's a true joke because it's very sad. Glenn Close, how many witches has that woman played?
And you know what's funny, Rourke, I know we're going to talk about, you know, some of the movies that he did in the 80s that we like the best, and I think Barfly is up there as well for me.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Rourke, although he might not be a big A-lister, he's out there working steadily.
Right.
And the lead actress in that movie, Faye Dunaway, who just knocks it out of the park, and she's such a great actress.
Hollywood royalty, right.
Hollywood royalty, and yet you don't really see her. She's they put her on a shelf, you know. She's not working a lot these days. And that's unfortunately the norm, I think, for a lot of older women in Hollywood. So I just find that sad. And I think Rourke, lying about his age and everything, there's a vulnerability in that.
Yeah, I think that if you can hold on to whatever, some mystery or some, quality to yourself that people don't know about or that haven't sought out, you know, that's a commodity for a personal commodity that is really hard to find in as a celebrity, and people will always say like, well, these people know what they got themselves into when they became a celebrity, and I don't buy that, only because, you know, we've always had performers from the beginning, like from the very beginning of human society. On an anthropological level, on a sociological level, we've always had performers So that's just part of who we are. It's in our DNA. And so we're gonna have, and our version of that now is actors and singers and musicians and stuff, these performers, and now YouTube. You know,
back
you can't.
then they could take off their makeup and go home and be okay.
Oh yeah, exactly. Especially during like the golden age of Hollywood, where you could be, you know, a drug addict or even like a latent homosexual too, and most of Hollywood wouldn't know about. Case in point, Rock Hudson. There was an element of privacy back then. Yeah. That doesn't exist anymore for actors.
Or you could be a chauvinistic pig, just
totally,
a asshole.
Yeah, and we'll get to other parts of his career where it really starts to that really plays into his life, and I think that sets the rest of his career. But moving forward, his dad split.
Yeah.
And his mom ended up into another relationship with his stepfather. He had two other siblings. He had his brother Joey, and then he also had a sister. And his sister. Most people know about Joey because Rourke talks about him a lot. Most people don't really know much about his sister, only because I think that was another level of protecting his family, and I think protecting
for sure.
And because I was surprised I knew he had a brother before, but I didn't know he had a sister. And so he had this stepfather who was extremely abusive, definitely physically. I've seen a lot of interviews with Rourke, and the way that he talks about it leaves a lot of gray areas. So I don't know for sure. We'll probably never know, but there's an area where it almost feels like there was more than just physical and mental abuse, and that's mere speculation. But I think that ties into the idea that he, for a long time, had to protect himself.
And he was a tough kid. He was growing up in a tough neighborhood. I think he was born in New York, but I think he actually spent his youth in Miami, if I'm correct, or on the outskirts.
Right, and that's the thing that they talk about a lot, is that Rourke was always a very sensitive kid, and he grew into the rebellious personality that he has just out of what we do, which is like we protect ourselves.
Put on a front.
We put on a front, and he eventually fell into that rebellious attitude. And I think that the fact that he grew up in New York, the fact that he just generally around that time in the 50s wasn't a great time to live in New York. New York didn't start, young people, you don't know this, but New York didn't really start becoming the nice, wonderful tourist attraction you had until like the past 30 years.
And it still isn't in some,
Yeah,
some
it's
areas.
been gentrified a lot, and there are places where you could take quote unquote your family to. But New York and Chicago have always been places that have, they're big cities, and with lots of people comes crime and whatever.
And especially when you have a stepdad who's like a big alpha male and kind of pushing you to be that tough guy, to be
right, and that was I guess the point that I was trying to make, which is that he didn't have a whole lot of really positive male figures in his life, and he eventually, as we do, being a kid myself who was also somewhat of a child who didn't grow up much with his father, we find these father figures everywhere. And he sought them out all over the place, and we'll get to more of that. Jump forward now in time, and also I also want to point out too, this is really important to him and possibly how he views women, or at least when he was younger, which is that his mom turned a real blind eye to a lot of the abuse that was happening with his stepfather, and so that for him, he has carried a resentment towards her his entire life. It's now, I feel like in his older years, the interviews that I've seen has died down a little bit as these things do, but I can imagine that that was a really hard thing to have to deal with, going through these motions of possibly blaming your mother for your father leaving, going through this process of blaming yourself for your father leaving, and then on top of that, having a mother who wasn't there for him or to protect him from this evil that lived in his own home that's awful.
That's pretty tough to deal with
for anybody. That's really hard,
and they were in a bad neighborhood, and he was kind of running with the wrong people. And he grew up real quick.
Yeah,
and he had some athletic talents. I think he was a baseball player.
Yeah, that was another thing too that I found really
which is where Mickey came from.
Yeah, he was very involved in. I mean, obviously he gets into boxing later, but he was very much involved in like some very, I guess, quote unquote traditional sports.
Boxing and baseball. Yeah.
Baseball. I know that he also got into some other stuff too.
Little football,
little this and that, which is cool. I mean, I think that's great. It's surprising to me considering that he's such a non-conformist.
But he had the body. He grew up. He was big and strong.
Yeah, he was a strong dude, and also he was, he'll always be. I hate to use the word, but he'll always be the blue collar actor, which is that he knows how to work. He knows what it means to have goals. He knows what it means to have principles, and maybe all of that stuff is born out of his years of sports. I don't know. They don't really talk about that too much. We're going to flash forward to when he was 19. He moved to a more artistic part of New York to become an actor. You know, people have this view of, this generalized view of men as being very simple, and it's not just women, it's, you know, general culture and stuff. And I think that Rourke is definitely a very complex guy. And so he, for whatever reason, there's a lot of stories that tell why this happened, but he just decided he wanted to be an actor. And so he joined a bunch of artists, and they took him in, and he wanted to be a boxer, but his career was cut short by an injury, so he had to pursue other things, and he just decided, this acting thing looks like it's a good deal, I'm going to do that. And so he got into it.
And I think he worked some odd jobs around that time. I remember an interview where he talked about being a bouncer for a gay nightclub.
Yeah, well, he said it was a trans nightclub. It was to me, a very interesting, a very interesting way that it's talked about. Rourke, I think, is a very progressive dude, but he's also not that progressive. So, like all people, and so we'll get into his politics. I think we will talk about the political stuff later. Yeah, and we'll get into that. And so, he's a very complex guy.
But he ended up finally, get into a good place with acting, where he showed so much promise that he was able to make his way too.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though, is that he was one of those people that always considered acting to be not necessarily a passion, or not necessarily an end-all to all things. He just thought as being another job. And that something that was artistic, that was a little more free, and somebody who's had to live up in such a controlled, abusive life, his whole life is sprinkled with him fighting for his own personal freedom, and that informs a lot of the choices that he makes as an adult. But he ended up coming into the friendship of a man, Carl Montgomery, who was one of the first major proponents in educating him about the industry, about Hollywood, about what it means to be an actor. And he used to give him books, basically taught him the craft, which is something a lot of people maybe don't really understand or know about, which is something that you have to get into with acting, especially. There's a whole methodology. There's lots of methodologies, but there's a general methodology about how to be an actor and how you're supposed to conduct yourself. Although there were some lessons that I think later on that he might have missed or overlooked that'll come about as far as his appreciation or understanding of film or the industry.
Right.
And he after learning about the craft, he learned, and something that I also find in myself is that when I learn something new, I want to learn everything about it. And he got really good at it, and he eventually learned that the next logical step for him would be to join the actor's studio. That became a goal of his, which is really funny to me and kind of weird. And this is something I also didn't know about him, was that he, eventually auditioned and became a part of the actor's studio, which, if you guys don't know, the actor studio is a really big amalgam of actors and professionals. But at the center of what they try to go for, which is a thing called method acting. And every one of the people that have been a part of the actor studio are method actors. And method acting is just figuring out your own personal way of creating a character, of imbuing yourself into the character so that it provides you not only with some ground to be able to act, but it also provides a unique standpoint in your acting.
And this was back at a time where Lee Strasberg was actually running the actor's studio, and it was a little bit less, probably less prestigious than it is now.
Yeah, it was a lot more grittier. I mean, we had people, De Niro, we had, Brando, Dean, they were all,
Yeah, and I think when Rourke was there, he actually was doing scenes with, Christopher Walken.
Yeah, and they became friends.
Harvey Keitel.
And
some other big names out there, and it meant everything to him. So he was working small jobs in the neighborhood, but then he was trekking over to the actor's studio doing these scenes, and that was his life and what he envisioned to possibly be his future.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool too that he idolized. Brando was a big influence for him. Dean was also a really big influence for him, and both of these guys are these enigmatic people who have these layers of complexity to them, and a lot of that complexity comes from sensitivity. Brando was a sensitive guy. Dean was a very sensitive guy. Rourke is a very sensitive guy. People think of him, they think of him being this gruff character who he ended up playing,
Yeah.
But really, I think what the biggest appeal for him for both men and women is the fact that he represented an aspect of masculinity that I think a lot of people didn't see a lot.
Yeah, and I remember when I first saw Mickey on film, when I watched Angel Heart, the look of Mickey Rourke is...
He was definitely at his most Rourke.
Yeah, I mean, he reminded me a little bit of Michael Madsen. I think I had recently seen Pulp Fiction.
Which he was supposed to be in.
Which he was supposed to be the Bruce Willis character in that, yeah, the boxer, but he blew that one off. You know, he also reminded me a little of Bruce Willis in a way, maybe a little Richard Gere in there, some of that New York stuff, but also there was a dark grittiness to him, like you said, a blue-collar aspect of him. And then also, underneath it all, that sensitive side, you know, that vulnerability that kind of shone through, and I think that was... in him, you know, not just in the characters he was playing, but in him.
Well, I mean, you look at some of the characters he plays, you look at some of the parts he takes on. It's almost like he takes them as challenges, because then he can add that to them. They're not always characters that, you know, Barfly, for example, like that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I try to imagine different actors playing that character. And I'm like, well, I think, you know, Rourke was probably the best guy, especially at the time, for playing that part, you know, because of what he brings to it. And it's that vulnerability and authenticity to him, to play a real person, you know, not just a character, but a lot of realistic weight to the parts that he brings. You know, he worked his ass off through the actor studio. He had all these odd jobs. Like he said, he was a bouncer at a you know, LGBTQ plus establishment.
Yeah.
And that's I guess the 21st century of saying that. For him, it was a tranny bar. And he worked his ass off. And the story that I hear a lot is that people say, like, he would literally not eat. He would not eat so that he could pay for being a part of, you know, he pays dues to be a part of the actor studio.
Right.
And that type of sacrifice is something that's going to be, you know, all over his life, is that if he sets his mind to something, he's going to do it. You know, and that's the quote unquote blue collar aspect to him. You have something that you need to do, and so you put in the work to get it. And Mickey Rourke put in the work to do it. You know, nothing was handed to this guy. He's not Hollywood royalty. Part of being a part of the actor studio, and something that I think that was a major thing for him to really get in touch with as a young man, was that in order for you to become a method actor, a really good method actor, you have to learn more about yourself. And you have to dig deep. You have to not only look at the good stuff, but also you have to look especially at the ugly stuff, because tragedy is part of acting. He definitely has a lot of tragedies, so he's had to delve into a lot of those things. And part of him delving into that is that he actually found his father, and he saw something that happens for us as adults that happened to me, which is that you see your parents as human beings, not just these mythical characters. And Rourke never knew his father. He only knew this demon that lived in his home. So when he saw his father, and he actually saw that he was, like, not doing too well, you know, he was, you know, a drunk, and he was all these things. But for him, it was like he was able to humanize a mythic aspect of his personality. And by humanizing it, it allowed it to be mortal, and he let it die, you know.
Yeah, he did it for a scene, you know. He had to do a scene for Actors Studio, and his instructor told him that she thought it would do him well to go talk to his father.
Yeah.
And so he looked up his dad, had a meeting with him, spent the day with him, and then was able to come back and do this scene.
A couple years later, I think it was like 2 years later, his dad ended up dying from the complications of drinking. He basically drank himself to death. So he knocked out that audition for, you know, the reason why he met his father was, you know, for an audition, and he won because of his honesty. And that's, like I said, his authenticity and all that, that's all part of what, but the word honesty is one that came up a lot when I was looking into his years with the actor studio. That's always going to be the best part of Mickey Rourke, is that he's, you know, honest. So he got into the actor studio. He moved to Hollywood. This is where Mickey learned the stuff that he probably didn't get to, the stuff he wasn't taught necessarily by these books and by this experience. At the end of the day, Hollywood is a business.
Yeah.
It's not this fun town. It's not this, you know, group of artists running around doing whatever the hell they want. We're
not here to make fine art. We're here to make money.
We're here to make money. It's a business, and that's never been more true than now. So he learned that it was all politics. You know, there's elements of this that he overlooked when he was younger, and so his first major role was in Body Heat, and this is 1981.
Yep. Which actually I think is still a pretty good movie. I think it still holds up.
I mean, I don't really want to get too much in Body Heat, only because he's plays such a small role in it.
But he kind of steals it.
He presented a lot of the characteristics in that movie that led him to go on to the other movies that made his career. And so it was funny because I heard about this anecdote where it was his first role and he ended up asking for more money, more right off the bat. His first acting gig, he asked for more money than what they were offering, and his agent, everybody was telling him, you're crazy, you're not going to get, usually you take a hit when you do this. But he ended up getting in the part, and this is the first instance of Rourke basically being like, I don't want to compromise ever. And he's never compromised with, for the most part, he never compromised with a lot of his parts because of their artistic integrity.
One thing I want to mention, I think you made a really good point, which is that Rourke wanted to make art and wasn't interested in a business and making money. If you look at all his greatest performances, even the more recent ones to the classic ones in his heyday, his greatest performances were all art.
Yeah.
None of them were business or money-making projects. The ones that actually were about the work and were about presenting something, beautiful for an audience, those are the films that he shined in. And the movies that were made for business and made for money are ones that I would say he quote unquote phoned in.
We will definitely get to those. And Body Heat was great. It was a great start for his career. He was able to get paid more money than what he expected, and I think that he's stated as being that was the beginning of the end for him in Hollywood. And the reason why I bring compromises up a lot is that he said it himself. In his childhood, because of what he was put through, he had to make a lot of compromises as a human being. And so once he was able to control his life and he became free as an adult, he told himself that he would never compromise again. And that's not just true in his career, but it's just true in his entire life, that he has never compromised. And that's true to his character almost, and it's to a fault.
Right.
Because it eventually ends up almost ruining his life.
It led to his greatest successes and his greatest failures.
Totally, yeah. So now we enter into the first half of the 80s. We have his smaller roles. Diner, which is a good one. I like, Diner's a pretty good movie.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, I think it's
Barry Levingston's start.
But
I just saw a Barry Levingston film that I didn't even know was Barry Levingston, and it's this weird comedy that probably didn't make any money with Jack Black and Ben Stiller. Envy.
No, I didn't see that one. But,
you never saw that?
No, but I definitely think that he deserves his own. He will get his own podcast. If
Jimmy
not,
Hollywood.
then
Jimmy Hollywood with Joe Pesci.
There you go. What I do want to talk about a lot actually is Rumblefish. The reason why I want to talk about that movie especially is that there's two movies in his career that I feel like are almost like the bookends of his career. And the first bookend is Rumblefish. And if you guys are not familiar, Rumblefish was a book written by the same author that wrote The Outsiders.
S.E. Hutton.
Yeah, and she had all these ideas that, were very... it's interesting that she wrote all these books about boys and about men, you know what I mean? And not just about, Twilight shit where they're glittery and they're pretty and that they, can do no harm or whatever. She wrote about boys who were complicated. And I think it was probably her way of trying to understand the male psyche, but she did it in such a way that I was like, whoa, holy shit. Like, The Outsiders is one of my favorite movies for that reason. And so Rumblefish, the main theme of Rumblefish is basically that we have disenfranchised youth who are nihilistic and have no future. And Coppola has said that that's what he wanted to make. He wanted to basically make a punk rock movie. He wanted to make a rebel movie. And Coppola's always been, he loves the French New Wave. And the French New Wave was all about breaking barriers, getting rid of conventions, screw the golden era of Hollywood, screw all the conventions and shit telling us rules and stuff.
Exactly.
We can do whatever we want. And so Coppola does that in all his films.
And especially in that one, if you read about Coppola and if you listen to Coppola's commentary on Rumblefish, he talks about the fact that they didn't really have a full script for the film. Even they were using the book Rumblefish.
Yeah.
And they were just mapping out scenes and just trying some scenes with Dennis Hopper, Rourke, a young Matt Dillon, young Diane Lane, and it was such a creative, artistic process that I almost feel that I wish Rourke would have worked with Coppola more often. I feel like they really clicked. There was something about that Rourke loved that process.
And I think that Coppola, although he does have his favorite actors, and a lot of that has to do with his, heritage, and a lot of that has to do with, the Hollywood royalty and all that stuff. It's fine. I love Coppola. He's a great director. I think he's one of those directors that has evolved so much over his career that, I love that, because there's films that I can watch of his and I can be like, this is art. And then there's films of his where I watch and I'll be like, this is garbage. And I love that. I love that about a director, that a director...
Rainmaker.
Well, yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
We'll talk about that, because that's going to come up a little later.
We all love that movie.
It's alright. It's fine. But Rumblefish I want to talk about especially because, that was Mickey. Mickey was a young, rebellious youth who didn't think he had a future, and everything was about fighting. And the scene where they're in the pet shop with the fish and, the colored fish, that's magic to me. That is like one of the most magical moments in a film, because that in itself gets to the heart of the story, it gets to the heart of the everything.
It gets to the heart of Mickey.
And if you haven't seen the movie Rumblefish, first of all, you should go watch that movie. It's great. I rewatched it recently for this podcast, and I totally forgot how artistic it was, like how French New Wave it was. There's a lot of stuff where I was like, whoa, look at these clouds, and
yeah.
And then we get to like the pet store moment where they wanted to shoot these fish in color, and there's a lot of ways you can do this. Had they had the budget, I'm sure they would have just rotoscoped it and had it drawn in afterwards. But what they ended up doing, which is ingenious, they shot the fish tanks in color against a green screen.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I thought it was rear projection, but it was this green screen. It looks convincing because of the acting, but also because of the way Coppola's a genius. Yeah. And the cinematographer was a genius. It was actually his idea to do this. So they have this scene where Mickey Rourke's character is showing Matt Dillon's character these fish. That's
Rumblefish.
Rumblefish. It's where the title comes from, and they're the beta fish, or the Siamese fighting fish as they were called before, which is not PC. Now it was barely PC then. And so the reason why he talks about the Rumblefish and the reason why he brings them to show him these things is because they're male fish and that they'll fight each other, and that's the characters in the movie. They'll fight each other. But what he points out is that if you bring a mirror to the fish will fight its reflection until it dies. And that's these characters in this movie, and at that point that was Mickey Rourke at that moment. He was constantly fighting things, and this is something you learn as an adult. You're in this race that is your life, and really the biggest opponent that you have is going to be yourself. It's always going to be the thing that holds you back. It's always going to be the thing that keeps you from the stuff that you want. And that's why I learned a new appreciation for that film, because I liked it just on a technical aspect because of Coppola. And also you get to, we can talk about Nicolas Cage a little bit here. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, let's not. But I think that was Nicolas Coppola's.
He was Coppola then. He was his first role. Yeah.
But I will say though that I think Mickey in the movie Rumblefish and his character of Motorcycle Boy, he himself is fighting against that cliche of being that typical caricature, guy who is from a small town, is a blue-collar guy, and is kind of the pretty boy, and the girls dig him. He's popular, he's a fighter, but he's not going anywhere, you know? He goes off to California, and he kind of finds himself, and he finds his mother. It alludes to in the film, although you never meet her as a character. And then he comes back, and he's not the same guy anymore. He's evolving, from that cliche, and he's trying to, butt up against what he is, quote unquote, supposed to be.
Right.
And I think that in itself is very indicative of Rourke. And
yeah, totally. And I think that's what's really cool about Rumblefish is not just the movie but also the book, is that Mickey Rourke's character is just called the Motorcycle Boy. He's not really you never know his name, not even in the book. And that's ironic that he's this character who represents this liberation, but he's a mythic character. He's not given a name, He's this. What is the point of that? For me, it's really just that idea that that's something that's almost unattainable. To really be free of your own personal Rumblefish. It's really hard to leave and make your own path and have an identity. And that part especially I think is really great. I think Matt Dillon's okay in it. I think Eric Roberts is amazing in that movie. I think he's so ridiculous. But Eric Roberts is an actor that I think he's so great because
he had a good friend of Rourke that they actually made several films together.
Yeah, Eric Roberts is actually very pivotal in fact I'd say that he's responsible for bringing Rourke back, but we'll get into that.
Side note about Rumblefish. I have a 13-year-old stepdaughter who just read The Outsiders and saw the Outsider movie and saw Rumblefish. So, yeah, let's keep this going, young generation. Check these out. And both books are really great, too.
Yes.
Not just the films.
No, just the films. They're very short, too. They're small little books, so I mean, like, you
Easy
can...
read.
Easy read. Both of them are very easy read. Rumblefish is tiny. It's a small little book.
I have it. I have it right in here somewhere.
So after Rumblefish, he did The Pope of Greenwich Village.
Eric Roberts.
Eric Roberts again. Also really good in that movie. He just, he's such a good clown. Movies, it's okay. I think
I think okay is underappreciating. I actually think it's really good. I think there's aspects of it that make it like, oh man, cringe-worthy. This is cheesy.
Yeah.
But there's like overall the story about these two guys,
right?
You know? And just at the heart of the story and the heart of the acting from the two major characters.
They sell it totally, yeah.
They sell it, and it's also, you know, I think it's good.
I wouldn't say that it's a bad movie, but I definitely wouldn't say it's not like Rumblefish to me. Rumblefish to me is like, I don't know. I don't know. I remember when I was.
It's a near perfect film.
It's it's so funny because it was critically panned at the time. I think it only has like a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I think it was like too artsy fartsy.
I think because Coppola was being such a rebel at the time, I think the industry turned on him, and there's a lot more to there that I really couldn't get into because I don't really know. But I would definitely say that I think Coppola's royalty. He was then, and that's the reason why he could get away with making a movie like that, and get away with a lot of the movies that he made that were very experimental.
Thank God they let him make a few films, after the Godfather series.
And that's really the only reason why, that's the reason why he could get away with a lot of this stuff. And he paid his dues. I'm not saying he didn't. They all did. But okay, so the
Pope of Greenwich Village also was a Cimino film.
Yeah.
And he also, did Year of the Dragon,
right,
with Rourke as well, and I think worked on Rourke in Heaven's Gate as well. So Cimino, I think, was a director that Rourke respected and worked with several times and has good things to say about today.
Totally, yeah. And I just actually pulled out Robert Ebert's his criticism of the movie. And I say it's pretty close. It's pretty much what we said.
Let's hear some quotes.
It's direct quote. It's worth seeing for acting, and it's got some good laughs in it. And New York is colorfully observed. But don't tell me this movie is about human nature, because it's not. It's about acting. And I couldn't agree more, because the acting is so good. And
Once again, Roger's spot on there. Right?
He really is. Yeah, he knows what he's talking about. And so I think that's pretty perfect. It does have a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, so, it's critically accepted. And it
sure wouldn't if it came out in 2017.
Not, definitely not. No, it's a little too dry, and it's a little too, okay, so the next one is Eureka. I actually didn't see much from this. I didn't see anything.
I've seen Eureka. It's got Gene Hackman and Rourke. Rourke plays a small role. It's a good film, but it's not really a highlight in Rourke's career, I would say.
Yeah, I think this is around the time Gene Hackman was kind of just like, I'm phoning it in for a while, and he didn't start getting really big. He didn't start getting good, in my opinion, until like the 90s, when he was just like tired, maybe. I'm just kidding.
Except for The Conversation. Like, let's not...
Well, The Conversation came out in the 70s, though. That was like, that 70s Gene Hackman is always going to be the best Gene Hackman.
Right. So you're saying he went through a period where he was
I think
Hoosiers.
Yeah, exactly. He went through a period where he was just like, I'll take whatever, and they all do it.
I'm going to shit on this director. I'm going to have fun, like, being a...
Because Hollywood, nothing will make you more cynical than Hollywood. And whether you exist in it or outside of it, because I think a lot of my cynicism probably comes from Hollywood and from...
it's a learned
trait. But in the early 80s, he was actually most people probably don't know this, and I didn't really think about this much either, which is that he was a huge proponent in the Brat Pack. In fact, he was, for the long period, he was the Brando, so he was the leader of the Brat Pack. Okay. And he hated that. That was the thing that started, for me, I think that was the beginning of the end for him, which is that he got labeled, he got put into a box, and he had people telling him who he was.
Right.
3 things that, he's fought against his entire life, and now he's on the cover of Teen Beat, you know what I mean?
Man,
as this bad boy, you know what I mean?
Not him.
Exactly. But, Dean went through the same thing, and we all know how that turned out. So, the Hollywood dream is it has a very reckless attitude with art. It has a very reckless attitude with actors. It has a very reckless attitude with everything about it. They will take it to ad infinitum if it means money for them, and we can see that, you know, clearly now. Everything is all about profit margins, you know, and trying to find the path of least resistance towards revenue.
Right.
And so that's why we're seeing reboots. That's why we're seeing all this stuff, is, you know,
Nothing's
original because it's a, you know, I get it. These producers are making these big things. They want to invest a lot of money. There's a lot of risk. You don't want to lose out on a lot of money. Case in point, there was several huge movies that came out this year that flopped financially.
Yeah.
One of them I really loved was Valerian. That was a great movie, so original. That opening sequence was worth enough to see it. You should definitely see Valerian. So yeah, he.
So what came after Eureka? What was he up to?
What came next in his career, which was a really big deal, was of course 9.5 Weeks.
Right.
And as everybody remembers, it's commonly known for that food scene where they're, you know, having they're, you know, having some foreplay with some food.
I hope it's known for more than that, because for me, 9.5 Weeks is, I don't know. I know that it's a cheesy film in many ways.
Sadly, it's defined him.
I know that it's, you know, just the music alone, those scenes, you know, some of the dialogue. However, I do think Adrian Lyne is an accomplished, talented, artistic director, and I do think that Rourke and Kim Basinger really have something there, and I think that it's actually worth seeing. So I think anybody who hasn't seen the movie, I would check it out, and it's kind of the birth of Rourke as
a sex symbol.
Yeah, and like if you look at the film, like he's slimmed down in the movie. He had to lose a lot of weight for it. He looks different, you know. They try to refine his look and make him look like more of like a Wall Street guy, because he's a blue collar guy.
Yeah, they cleaned him up. They turned him into this into a sex symbol. This is the beginning of him being. I mean, he was a part of the Brat Pack before this point, but no one ever had seen him in a sexual scenario,
right?
Until they saw that sex scene with the food, and that sex scene with the food. You know, much like 50 Shades of Grey opened up some doors for a lot of people sexually that probably didn't exist before that. So, I mean...
And it wasn't just with the food. There's a lot of wonderful sex scenes there.
Yeah, like the movie is great. It's a great...
the first scene where they first hook up with the ice cube. The scene where he gives her his watch and he's like...
Right, and the movie's... What's great about the artistic direction, it's all about sensuality.
Mm-hmm.
And before that point, I feel like people were really afraid of, and they were really scared. I mean, we're still scared of sex, but people back then, I mean, if you looked at sex scenes in movies before that, you know, they weren't, as I would put it... provocative or graphic.
Yeah.
And, you know, sex was seen as just being like a way of confirming the relationship between two people in a movie, you know, like whether it be they pan out to the window to show the storm or whatever, metaphor or whatever, to show that, like, you know, there's some change in this person's life, or their relationship has reached a certain level. But in this movie, it's like sex positivity is all about just, you know, seeing sex as a positive thing.
Sure, and also those two characters are playing a game throughout the film. It's like it's a sexual game, and it's kind of at the expense of their own relationship in the film, where it ends, where this game has to stop somewhere. Someone has to say enough, right?
Yeah.
They don't really get to know each other as people, and that's part of the fun of the sex, part of the mystery, and, you know, the excitement of the relationship.
Right.
But it's also the downfall of the whole thing, and hence 9.5 Weeks. It's a short relationship. It's very, you know, exciting and sensual, but it comes to a conclusion. And notice at the end of the film, when Rourke comes back and tries to get her back because he really cares about her, the first thing he does is he starts to tell her about himself.
Right.
And it's too late, you know? I mean, they've been together, they've created this dynamic, and now he's trying to tell her about this humble beginning, and his mother was a clerk in a grocery store, and this is about me, and it's too much, you know? It doesn't work. And I feel like that also is a window into Rourke himself as a person.
Totally, yeah.
Once again.
Right, yeah. I mean, you can only really say those words and play that part as if that wasn't a part of your character. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be examined about relationships. It's a examination about, like, what levels and how do we appreciate and how do we value our sexual or even just our intimate relationships. And if you watch it, and I think you should watch it, you can look at it and be like, and examine it and say like, well, what's the dynamic between the two of these people? And not only do that, with the magic of movies is that you can take that into your own personal life and you can say, well, what is my personal dynamic with my partner, with the person that I'm with, whether
right.
And what does that really mean? And I think you never really saw that kind of realism before 9.5 Weeks, really. I mean, there was there occasionally to really kind of delve into like the underlying nature of any intimate relationship before it was all surface level stuff. Breakfast at Tiffany's, where they go to the shop and they put on masks and they act goofy. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But in this,
it's a little more real. Gritty.
Totally more real. And and I also want to make reference to the fact that scene, the food scene, has also been parodied a lot in movies.
Yeah.
And case in point, Don't Be a Menace. Don't Be a Menace and that movie came out in the late 90s, and that one, the early 90s, and that movie had a really funny sex scene with some food there. They took it to the next level. And
but props to Adrian Lyne for digging into that level of sexuality and a connection between two people.
Totally.
And also, I'm still trying to convince Todd here to do a retrospectoid on Adrian Lyne. So here's crossing our fingers and hoping that might happen
someday.
Yeah.
This podcast will go on until I die, so at some point it will happen.
You'll run out of material
in an infinite universe. Yeah, it's on a list somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that for me, when I think of movies like that, when I think of movies that are that raw and that intimate, I think of like movies like Full Disclosure. I think of what was the other one?
Indecent Proposal.
Indecent Proposal. These movies where they
Unfaithful.
These
are all Adrian Lyne films, by the way.
And these films really delve into like really kind of pulling apart intimacy between people, whether it be psychotic or whether it be like in this case this
even Lolita,
which
is a film he made, a remake of obviously the Kubrick film in the book.
And I do want to do a podcast on Kubrick, and I think that Lolita is one of my favorite of his films. It might actually be my favorite of his films.
Really?
For a long time, 2001 was a huge favorite of mine, but Lolita is slowly becoming one of my favorites.
Wow. Okay.
And that might have to do with age, but that also has to do with the fact that I know the world a little bit better than I did, when I first started getting into Kubrick. He's my favorite director, by the way. I can easily say that. Gun to my head, I can easily say that Kubrick's my favorite director. So for sure, there'll be some Kubrick coming at some point. And now we're going to talk about the movie that's actually been playing in the background for this entire podcast, which is Angel Heart. 1987 is when Angel Heart came out, and this movie... It's actually one of those movies where I feel like I kind of have to like amp myself up to watch it. You know what I mean?
Really?
Yeah, because I can watch... I don't know. Let me try to think of a movie that... Well, I can watch Children of Men, which we'll do a podcast about. I can watch that movie without any ramping up or anything. If I'm gonna watch Angel Heart, I kind of like...
You have to like...
I have to put
talk yourself into it. Huh?
I have to put myself into that noir.
For me, it's like it's mother's milk to me.
Oh yeah, and this was the first movie that you saw of his, and he's so good in it. And I was joking with Alec earlier that it's like totally pure like Rourke, and this is where he kind of hits the pinnacle of Rourkeness.
Yeah.
He can be this charming guy, but he's also kind of waste about. He's also like, just like grimy and gritty and stuff.
And quasi, he can kind of be like charming and maybe even a little sensual and sexual. Like,
you definitely don't know how to feel about his character in this movie, and especially by contrast with
which
De Niro.
Is perfect for the role.
Exactly, and you can't talk about this movie without talking about how difficult it was filming with both De Niro and Rourke, because you had this young guy who was barely making it in the industry, who knew what he was worth, he knew his value, who never compromised, up against this guy who was already an established member, who was also a member of the Actors Studio, who, Rourke wanted to prove himself. It wasn't proving that he was better than De Niro, he wanted to prove he was just as good as De Niro.
He belonged in the room.
And he belonged in the room. And that De Niro at the time, I haven't really read too much about it.
He was pretty competitive,
but he was very competitive, and he didn't make it easy for this guy. He was like, "Who's this guy?" Coming in here, and at the time, people considered him to be a pretty boy, and he was coming off of 9.5. So
De Niro's like, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm only here for Alan Parker. Like, I'm gonna make it tough on this kid.
And as good as Rourke is in this movie, I love Rourke in this movie.
Yeah,
De Niro blows him away.
Come on, man. I disagree. I disagree.
I mean, to me, it's
I disagree.
Because
I completely disagree. I think Rourke owns the scenes with De Niro, but hey, The two best scenes in the film, I will say,
Yeah.
in my mind, are two scenes with Rourke and De Niro.
Totally.
The first is a scene where De Niro they're in a cafe and Robert De Niro is using his menacing long nasty fingernails to like crack a hard-boiled egg, and he's eating it like menacingly while Rourke is telling him the progress of the case. The other scene is where they're in a church together, and Rourke is again like telling him the progress of trying to find Johnny Favorite, his character in Angel Heart. What a funny scene.
Yeah.
What an awesome scene. Just two heavyweights just going at it like
Totally.
in the ring, you know?
And I'll admit, I have nothing but respect for De Niro. I think, he's made a lot of really good movies in comparison to the movies that he's made that have been bad. So the list of movies that he's done that are really good.
And he still makes a good one here and there.
Yeah, he still makes some really good movies. The reason why I like his performance so much in Angel Heart is because at that time for me, whenever I see it, I'm like, whoa, that's De Niro. And having grown up with this, more complex De Niro, a lot of us, I think, didn't realize that the beginning of him being this kind of like mythic person was Angel Heart. He could play against cast. He could, play this creepy ass fucking character.
Yeah, which actually is like, now that you mention it, it's the first time I think that, against the typical De Niro character that you would expect, right? Because he was a New York guy, a street guy. And in films he had made up to that point, he was mostly
Rourke.
That
he was
guy.
a blue collar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in this film, he's an elegant guy. He's a mysterious, aloof, wealthy man. At least.
Yeah.
We don't know much about him, and that's part of the mystique of the character. But
right.
When he's playing Louis Cyphier, even your name is a dime store joke.
It's one of those movies that I think if I saw it as a kid, I would have been like, nope. I don't
know if but I did see this as a teenager.
That's what I guess what I mean as a kid. I think,
and I was captivated though by this film, by every scene of it, and I just wanted more and more and more. I had no idea who Mickey Rourke was when I saw this movie. By the end, I wanted to see everything he'd ever done, and that's when I went back and started watching other films like Rumblefish, 9.5 Weeks, Pope of Greenwich Village, Year of the Dragon. Year of the Dragon, by the way, which is a horribly racist film.
Very racist.
Horribly racist.
Very racist.
But off performance alone, though, Rourke, he really gives it his all, and he has a nice performance in the Francesco, where he played a saint.
Oh right, yeah.
What else? What else was I watching around that? The Irish movie where he was.
The one where he got okay, we'll talk about that because the politics, because he got into a lot of trouble, but this is coming a little later. This was
started donating some money to the
We'll get into that. Yeah, we'll get into that. It's funny you brought up Bruce Willis before when we talk about Rourke. Rourke actually, I feel like it's funny because let's talk about the movies that he's turned down.
Okay.
Because there's a long list of movies that he's turned down that could have made him. And
maybe some bad choices.
Yeah, some of these he should have actually did. So we have Highlander that came in 1986. He was going to play the McLeod character.
Wow, okay.
And I think that was a good idea, only because he would not been good in that role. Christopher Lambert is perfect for that role because he can just fall into that hero status.
It just would have been a different thing.
It would have been weird. The Untouchables, 1987. He probably should have done that. He was actually going to play Tom Cruise's character in Rain Man. Tom Cruise actually picks up a lot of Rourke's scraps when it comes to acting. Top Gun.
Top Gun.
Mickey Rourke turned down Top Gun.
Tony Scott, rest in peace.
Yeah, it's a great movie, great director. He's been quoted as saying that he'll never become the next Tom Cruise in media at the time. It's so funny because I feel like Rourke was instrumental in warping Tom Cruise into the actor he is now. Because before this point, Tom Cruise wasn't taking on these roles.
Right.
He was playing this bro. He was playing
true.
This and
Rain Man was a big
and he totally became more grittier. He became more of a legit actor. And I think it's only because they probably told him, "Hey, we wanted Rourke for this role. We're going to ask you." You know?
Can you do it?
And I'm just speculating here, but I've noticed a pattern, and honestly, I'm not a big fan of Tom Cruise, so it wouldn't be a big stretch for me to think that because Rourke had turned down all these roles that were supposed to be, that they were made for him or written with him in mind, that he turned down that Tom Cruise eventually ended up taking. Same thing with Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis took a couple of roles, the major one being Pulp Fiction. There was another one that I kind of forgot, but so he also turned down Beverly Hills Cop.
Beverly Hills Cop, the Eddie Murphy role, if you can believe it.
And honestly, I'm happy he turned that down because like that movie would not be as big as it would have been without Axel Foley being played by Eddie Murphy.
We needed Eddie Murphy.
We needed him.
We needed him in our lives.
Totally, and it shaped the movie itself because from when I remember, Beverly Hills Cop was supposed to be a lot more darker and grittier, and Eddie Murphy actually added a lot of lightness to it, and that immediately changed the movie to something
He turned it
better.
into a movie where he was making fun of everything instead
Pretty much,
of a movie that took itself too seriously.
Exactly. So if Rourke was in there, it would not be what it was. Platoon. He was supposed to play. I don't remember who he was supposed to play in Platoon. I think it was. Willem Dafoe's character.
Now, did Oliver Stone write Year of the Dragon?
I don't think so.
Or am I getting this wrong?
I don't know. I don't.
Because I mean, I think Rourke would have done well in that film, Platoon, with Oliver at the helm.
Yeah, I think so too, and it's kind of funny because he ended up doing Thin Red Line, and he got edited out of the movie completely.
Yeah.
And I've never seen footage of that, but I would like to, just to see what he kind of maybe get like a view of what he might have been like in Platoon. But because he was turning down all of these big roles, he was also losing a lot of money because he was living this party boy life. He actually divorced this woman, Deborah.
And he didn't know how to manage money. He was a poor kid from a small
totally.
upbringing, and he had no idea what to do with all this money now.
Right.
While he was trying to not compromise and be an artist, he was also spending the shit out of his money. So
he was burning. He was a very bright candle in the Hollywood mega structure, and so that it was basically he was unraveling at this point. This was the beginning of Rourke starting to unravel. His anger issues were starting to come up. This is around the time that he was also in trouble with domestic violence. He's quoted here as saying, "I didn't have any clue about how to handle myself in a responsible, professional way." That was with the interview with Piers Morgan, which is a really interesting interview. I think you should watch it. I think that Piers Morgan is pure slimy little creep in that.
Yeah,
it's the most creepiest of him because he's just like this sniveling little creep who's like asking Rourke all the time about his conquest with women and how he idolized him for that reason.
He's
and
trying to get the dirt.
And Rourke's looking at him like, and Rourke's placating him because that's what Rourke does. But at the same time, Rourke gives him these looks where he's just like, dude, like, get off my nuts, you know what I mean? Like, chill out. And it's really funny. But I don't like Piers Morgan. Anyway, he was quoted as saying that, and I think that that's really cool. It's an admittance that you can have as an older person, is that at that time he didn't really know how to handle himself in a responsible, professional way.
Yeah.
And then we lead into
A
a
dark
prayer
period.
for dying. A prayer for dying was actually the thing that killed his career. And that was because he started condoning a lot of things that the IRA was doing. He started involving himself with politics that he now admits he didn't know anything about. He knew very little about what was going on. He knew very little about...
He was just a proud Irish.
Whichever way you feel about the IRA, and this is not about that, or what it was happening in Ireland, those things are in the past now. But in the moment when they were actually happening, when cars were being blown up and people were being murdered, he was saying some things that were very damaging to his career, and he was saying some things that were from a very ignorant standpoint. And those two things together, whether or not you're on the right side of history, or whether or not you agree with something that eventually comes out to be something positive, you should at least know something about it. And he didn't know much about it. He ended up getting in a fight with Sam Goldwyn, and because of that, Rourke was blacklisted. He was untouchable. Nobody wanted to do anything with him. People weren't writing stories about him anymore, unless it was the Enquirer. And a lot of the stuff that was written about him in the Enquirer wasn't true. And this was what created the persona that people know of Rourke now, that he was this bad boy, this recluse, this destructive person. And he was that at the time.
He was to an extent, but a lot of it was a negative. It was just all negative press.
Right. And the thing too about the whole IRA situation as well is that he pissed off a lot of Irish people too. They were very annoyed by this American actor coming up over involving himself in these politics when it was clear in interviews that he didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And he was supplying all this money to these different groups,
rebel causes that it scandaled his career irreversibly. He was just stirring shit up everywhere.
I mean, honestly, if you're really looking at it, like, I mean, anyone can take the standpoint where it's like, I was just trying to be positive in like a situation I believed in, but really what it was is he was looking for a cause to just be.
And I feel like subconsciously he was probably self-destructing. He was intentionally
self-sabotage.
Yeah, he was intentionally sabotaging his shit.
The booze was going up, you know, the drugs are going up. He never really had too much of a problem with drugs, actually, surprisingly.
He says he didn't, but there's some stories.
There's some stuff that comes up, and it's clear. Yeah, it's very clear. I mean, come on, you can't.
There's some cocaine.
If I was Mickey Rourke back then, there would have been a lot of drugs. Let's just leave it at that. One thing that I read about around this time is that someone had said that Mickey Rourke confuses his role as an actor within the system, and the system just wasn't having it. You know, that's part of him saying, I didn't understand it was a business.
Right.
Was that he didn't understand where he fit into that business beforehand.
Yeah.
And through all these things that he went through, basically he went through almost all of the troubles that every actor goes through. And domestic abuse, the stuff that in the news about political stuff.
But he was so honest and transparent about it.
But that's why I think is because
he didn't cover it. You know?
Right.
Like he didn't make an effort to.
He was unabashedly himself. Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Flaws and all, you know.
Right. And so when it comes to Hollywood, actually, and this is true even now, and this is something I didn't think about until it was posited to me this way, which Hollywood in a way is a collective of artists. And if you're part of that collective, they back each other up, they fight for each other, and Rourke wasn't doing that.
He was an outsider.
He was an outsider, but he was still part of the system.
And he almost like purposely made himself that way, you know? He purposely bucked at that system.
Yeah, totally.
And bucked at those people who were in there and would have helped him and helped protect him. And he didn't want any part of it.
Yeah, and in a way, it's like being an artist and being a creator and knowing that you need that system. I mean, I think Hollywood's bullshit, but I think that I get the reasoning behind it. With, you know, in a way, you kind of do have to support each other.
Sure.
But I also think that maybe sometimes supporting the system is by telling them it's pretty fucked up, you know, and it's pretty
hard to do that though when you're not, you know,
he wasn't Tom Cruise.
No.
Tom Cruise said that stuff, maybe people would listen. So he wasn't making hits at this point.
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
Yeah, we'll start getting into the hit or misses.
Okay.
So he wasn't Hollywood royalty anymore, so he wasn't protected anymore.
No, I don't know that he ever was really, but
he was part of the Brat Pack
to an extent.
He was part of all that stuff. Like
he was just getting in that lane, and then he swerved the car way off.
Yeah, well, he could have been in a situation where he could have, you know, said whatever that he wanted to and been
could have sold out
and could have got whatever he wanted. But he made some choices that I agree with, but he also made some mistakes that I don't think that we all make mistakes. But so he wasn't making hits, he wasn't being protected. The work was starting to get bad, and I'm going to be honest, his acting really started to suck at this point because he just didn't care.
It sucked when he didn't respect what he was doing.
Exactly, because he was so disenfranchised by the whole thing, and this was his way of freeing himself, and now he had to free himself from the thing that was freeing him, you know, and that always sucks. I know how that feels. So now we're gonna get to Wild Orchid that came out in 1990. Alec, do you want to tell us what Wild Orchid's about?
So Wild Orchid is basically trying to be a quasi 9.5 weeks.
Yeah, really.
I mean, it almost follows like the same major plot points for the characters. He's this guy who was blue collar and he had nothing, built himself up to be this rich guy, woos this beautiful young woman, but he has a fear of intimacy, so he doesn't want to be touched or be loved. Mm-hmm. But then he kind of overcomes that with her, and at the end, it's this beautiful thing, right? So, but Rourke, I think the biggest like emphasis we should make of this film is the fact that he met Carrie on the set.
The love of his life.
Yeah,
he said
to this day, which is kind of sad because if you listen to the way she talks about him now.
Yeah, but you know that she probably doesn't have a very good perspective on that time, considering that she was going through a lot of drug issues, heroin being the number one thing.
Yeah.
I think they were both doing drugs, but I think that the drugs, Mickey Rourke never ended up in the hospital or ended up with ODing or having a problem.
Although I think he may have shot her.
This
is something that's very disputed. It's hard to even know what's true or false.
This is the time that he got the label of being a wife beater. Because he got the violence and the drugs. 1992 to 1998 were not good times for Rourke. No. If they were bad before that point, they got worse.
Yeah, he was hanging around people like I think one of his better friends was Tupac Shakur.
It was around the time he was starting to put together Bullet, and he was starting to put together this thing, and he developed a very good relationship with Tupac Shakur and the thing.
Mike Tyson.
And Mike Tyson, yeah. Yeah, he was really he was realizing that he was so out of the system that he could do whatever the fuck he wanted and rub shoulders with whoever he wanted, whether it be,
It's kind of interesting the people he rubbed shoulders with, though, and the fact that issues they had in their lives were kind of similar to what he was going through.
Yeah, and then he turned down some more roles at this point that he probably shouldn't have turned down.
Oh boy, here we go.
And the biggest being is Tombstone. He was offered the role of Michael Biehn's character of Ringo. And I love Michael Biehn in that movie. I love his interactions. Everybody loves his interactions with Val Kilmer. Tombstone's one of those movies that I'm definitely going to do a retrospectoid about because that movie is so important to me.
We need to get my girlfriend in on that one.
He turned down that role, and at the time I don't think that he... We're watching the Angel Hearts in the background, and Mickey Rourke's now having a very violent sex scene with Lisa Bonet, and there's blood, and there's...
And it turns out that she's his, spoiler alert, daughter.
Yeah, old boy before old boy.
It's not good.
Yeah, you get to see a lot of Rourke that you probably didn't really want to see. Covered in blood. Back to Wild Orchid, or back to the roles he turned down at this point. Pulp Fiction, I think that Bruce Willis is like a kindred spirit in a way to Mickey Rourke. I didn't really like Bruce Willis for a long time, and I didn't start appreciating him until I got older. The complexity that Bruce Willis brings to all his roles, he brings a lot more humor than Rourke does.
I don't know. I think Mickey would have been great in that role.
Yeah, no, I think they both would have done their own thing, and you can see in the writing of how, going back to Tarantino was this video shop guy, so he's seen all of Rourke's stuff. And obviously, he writes. Yeah, exactly. He loves them, and he writes for these things. So of course, he probably wrote this character for. I didn't read that he did, but I'm sure
he did. He wrote it for Rourke.
And he wrote it for Rourke, and Rourke turned it down. I think probably because it had a lot to do with drugs, and it had a lot to do with the movie itself.
He was boxing, I think. Rourke was boxing,
and he was starting to box. And so that after Wild Orchid, after that one just completely failed, he landed flat on his face. It's considered his worst movie. Yeah. I can't say I can recommend watching it, but you should at least watch clips of it on YouTube, and you can definitely watch the trailer.
Actually, watch it. Watch it if you want to watch a movie that you want to make fun of, but also
if it doesn't,
also kind of secretly appreciate.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have like some money lying around, or if it's not too financially problem free, or if you could stream it or whatever. If it takes very little effort for you to watch it, I definitely suggest that you should watch it because there's a lot there that I think it's like glossy trash.
It's glossy trash, but there's a couple scenes that I feel like you can rescue from the ruins and say that this particular scene or that scene, you can see Rourke doing his thing. He's a talented dude, so even when he's phoning it in, there's a couple things.
Sifting through the records, there's definitely a black box there holding some gems, but some treasures. After that film in 1991 was the beginning of his 5-year stint as a boxer. This lasted from 1991 to 1994. He stated that he always had some unfinished business with his former boxing career.
I think it's still lasting now. I think he fought a fight a couple years ago. We'll get into that eventually, because then that even becomes its own little twisted, distorted thing. But it's getting kind of sad.
It's getting pretty sad. But he said he had some unfinished business. He said he needed a change, and he at this time he had a personal manifesto of self-destruction. And nothing lends itself to, a positive spin on that, or at least a more honed-in, constructive version of that is to just become a professional boxer. Yeah. And he had a very good career as a boxer.
He did. He never lost a fight.
Never lost a fight. He was in his 40s at the time. This is his version of a midlife crisis.
You could even watch some of the fights, I think, on YouTube now.
Yeah.
You can see that he actually had legitimate skill.
Yeah, he was for sure. It's not like, this Dustin Diamond crap where, Screech goes into the boxing. You know what I mean? Like, he was legit.
He put the work in, yeah. And I think that's why he did it, so he could have a trainer telling him what to do, and he could have this focus with his life where for 6 months he could, get into great shape and train and do this and that.
And be free. Yeah,
have a purpose.
Yeah, have a purpose, be free, and all that stuff. I totally get it. And Eric Roberts was quoted at the time of saying that Mickey's the kind of guy who comes from nothing, so everything's an accomplishment. So there's nothing much more of accomplishment. If anybody who's been in sports knows that the biggest high that comes from it is not just doing it in the time, but it's also, winning and accomplishing something. Boxing's all about that. Every one of those TKOs and every one of those wins that he got, those were accomplishments that he could physically attain himself.
Absolutely.
And that's something as a working class person, and me as a person who comes from the same background, and you as well, is that I can appreciate that. about him is I also come from nothing, you know, and every accomplishment for me is a big deal. But I've realized as an adult, we can win our triathlons and we can climb our Mount Everest, but it's like at what cost, you know?
Yeah, and I think an interesting fact about Mickey is I think personally, I guess this is just, you know, me speculating, but I think if you look back at some of his greatest accomplishments in life, I bet he would put those boxing wins high up on the list.
Totally, because those are things that you can accomplish. You know what I mean? Like
versus all the
on the
movies
working class,
and the
totally
money
on
and the
a
fame
totally on a working class perspective. Like
Yeah.
you know, you ask any blue collar Joe, you know, going to the factory or whatever, and you ask them what's a bigger deal, winning a boxing match or being in a movie. You know what I mean? Like obviously to a certain perspective, one thing is greater than the other. I think me personally, I don't know. It's kind of a hard question to answer, and it's always gonna be a hard question to answer. And it was a hard question for him. I mentioned earlier about the costs of doing these things in your life, and the biggest cost to Mickey, which is something that is really important to him, not personally, but it's important to him as all human beings. But you have an element to yourself that is all appearance and surface level. And before you meet a person, you see their face, and before you even appreciate somebody, you see the outside of somebody.
And he had what would be considered a beautiful face.
And he was a very good-looking dude, you know, and that's what he was known for. He was known for being this good-looking, sensitive guy, and because of all these boxing matches, he sustained some serious injuries that not only distorted his face, but needed to be corrected for lots of reasons, not just for superficial reasons, but for medical reasons. And because of that, his face got severely altered. I'll just do a real quick rundown of the injuries that he sustained, the major injuries, because there was lots of them. The ones that did the most damage to his face were he had a broken nose. He also broke a toe and some ribs. He split his tongue.
Yeah. Painful.
Very painful and just disturbing. And the biggest one was that he had a compressed cheekbone.
I think he broke his cheekbone.
And that was the major one that needed the most reconstructive surgeries and what altered his face the most. It's an interesting sunk cost, I feel like, in the story of Mickey Rourke and the story of Hollywood, or how he fits into that story. We attribute so much value to our actors being good looking, and we attribute so much to Rourke is still a good actor, whether or not his face is bashed in. You just add a mask over it.
Yeah, and let's face it, he looks pretty, by socially acceptable terms, hideous these days.
I think that, I think there was a large period where, he definitely didn't look he didn't look good at all. And I think that a lot of the surgeries kind of settled a little bit, and
but do you think his surgeries were strictly medically needed?
He's talked about how there probably was an element of him just self-destructing this image of himself, and that's what the boxing was literally. And then I think on a more intellectual standpoint, I think that there was elements to him wanting to just literally look different. He literally wanted to be different.
I think if you talk about Mickey Rourke and you want to be really candid, you have to talk about the fact that he changed his face.
Yeah.
And some of it was from boxing, and that was, understandable, and some was more than that, and even recently, even in the last few years, you can see some changes.
Yeah.
I think he's almost like in a Michael Jackson sort of a way.
I almost feel like,
we can't fully explain that, or really, it's not up to me to talk about that.
Right. For sure, but it exists, and it has to be looked at when you talk about Mickey Rourke, and it's a tragic element to him, a very complicated element. It's not tragic because he lost a beautiful face. It's tragic because he
wants to change who he is.
Yeah, he wanted to change who he was, and he's the one that was joking about how the surgeries have finally settled, and now that coincides actually interestingly.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, Rourke, the comeback.
His return to acting.
Let's skip over Double Team with Dennis Rodman, and let's go on to the...
Come on.
You want to talk about that? Let's do a podcast on Double Team.
Yeah, we'll do a little mini podcast. It had to be a mini podcast. There's not a lot to talk about.
You should watch the YouTube clips with Jean-Claude Van Damme and Mickey Rourke out at clubs. It's actually a little different than I expected.
Yeah.
They're holding hands.
Well, Double Team, he played the bad guy, and that's something to get into, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
So, the mid-'90s was the rise of the Gossip magazine. Before that, Gossip magazines existed, but they weren't held to such credibility as it was until the 90s. Born out of that is the stuff that most people probably take for granted now, about how much we know about actors, how much we know about their lives, how much we care about, how much value we put into that.
Which is kind of silly, if you ask me.
Pretty
Every
ridiculous.
waking moment.
Yeah.
Do we need to know?
Yeah, exactly. And that in itself owes a lot of discussion to, as far as the actor experience and being a performer. It's entitlement and on either side. And it's a very weird place to be. And it's probably no wonder Johnny Depp is like fucking crazy now, is that he's had to kind of like live in this area where he has
Johnny's
to be,
a hot mess.
he has to be Obama. When you're an actor, you have to be Obama all the time. And I'm not trying to knock on Obama, but just like every single thing you say has to be positive.
Yeah.
That's a hard experience to go through. It's not one that I would ever want to be privy to. So it was really hard for him to get parts. He had turned down all these really good parts in the 90s.
He turned his back on the system.
He turned his back on the
system completely.
Yeah, and the fact that he was boxing too at the time, I even remember as a kid, hearing them talking about his boxing career and being like, why is that such a big deal? And, now that I look back, I'm like, of course it's a big deal. It's like, it'd be like if Tom Cruise decided to be and I hate to keep comparing the two, but it'd be like if, like, a big, like Bruce Willis. Well, Bruce Willis became a musician.
Tom Cruise is the opposite of what Mickey Rourke is.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand the comparison.
Evil twin. He's been quoted as saying it's worse to be a has-been. He thinks it's better to have not made anything at all than to have been a has-been in his mind. We're now watching a scene in Angel Heart
where he realizes that the person he's been chasing the whole time is himself. Spoiler. Sorry for the pause.
If you've been keeping along with the movie and you see it and you see Rourke's real reaction to that scene, and Robert De Niro's reaction to him reacting, it's so
I know who I am.
So diabolical. Yeah. So he was he said that he would rather have not been an actor at all than to have been a has-been, and this is when he starts doing his supporting roles. The late 90s was all about supporting roles for him. There was John Grisham's The Rainmaker. Yeah.
Which, by the way, although we may say, it is what it is as a film, Rourke's role in that with Coppola, once again, directing at the helm, was expanded quite a bit. He was supposed to be a tiny little role. Bruiser Stone was his character.
Yeah.
Francis was tickled by Rourke's scenes to the point where he started writing new scenes. And then Rourke's character ended up showing up a little more in that film than was originally planned, which I think is cool.
It's really cool, and it's not a bad movie.
No, it's a formula. It's a John Grisham.
It's John Grisham. That's the only. Yeah. I think that's actually the biggest fault to that movie is that it's related to a John Grisham.
But I still enjoy it if I see it. Danny DeVito.
Yeah, I actually kind of forgot about him, but it's definitely one of those movies that I've seen with my mom, and I'll just leave it at that.
Claire Danes.
Yeah, it's definitely a movie you can watch with your parents and feel fine about.
Matt Damon, which is my favorite.
Yeah, he was such a young.
It's my favorite curse word.
Yeah,
Matt Damon.
And so after that, he did Vincent Gallo's Buffalo 66 in 1998, which is a polarizing film.
Brilliant.
And I think that eventually we had discussed this, but we will be talking about Vincent Gallo at some point. I don't really want to get into that too much. And honestly, Mickey Rourke's part in that really wasn't,
But it's a good little scene.
It is a good scene.
It's one scene.
Yeah.
And he's like, so you, the asshole, will confess to the crime so to free an innocent man. And if you don't do that, very bad and evil things will happen to you, and very bad and evil things will happen to your family.
Right. It's like I said earlier, it's one of those roles where he was able to find a niche for himself. Those were two roles that he did. He did some other ones as well, but he also was doing some writing in the mid-90s. Oh, he turned on the role for Tombstone. He turned that role down because he was writing FTW.
Fuck the World / Frank T. Wells.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie. I think it's worth watching just for the sake of watching it because it's interesting.
It's actually not that bad of a movie.
It's not terrible, no. And I think the thing that I want to talk about too about what Rourke did when he was writing films, and I only really want to talk about FTW and Bullet. The thing, he writes these characters for himself, and that's where you really understand who he is, because he creates these underdogs who are just trying to exist.
And that's kind of his idea of himself.
Yeah,
right?
he's an underdog.
He's writing himself. So.
Yeah. Whatever it is that the characters do, in the movies and stuff. And he also wrote Bullet, the movie that he started getting involved with Tupac Shakur. It's a pretty decent movie. I remember seeing that on cable when I was younger.
Yeah, I remember seeing Bullet back in the day. And
Yeah.
I remember the scenes with Tupac and Rourke, and how Rourke had just got out of prison. They were heroin junkies.
Right.
There's those scenes where, and Rourke, by the way, at that point is roided up, man. He's
he was starting to get pretty.
juiced
Yeah, he's
up.
starting to
Like,
get
he's
pretty
huge. He's brolic. There's a hint of like homosexuality in Bullett's character. The exact opposite of what you would expect from that type of character, that machismo.
Like it's, the thing that's always been true about Rourke is that he's never been afraid to just be like, you know what, I can be sensitive and I can play this character that has like slight latent homosexual tones to it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that owes to him making a statement about prison or something. I don't know, but
it might be.
Could be. I don't know. I haven't seen Bullet in a long time. I haven't seen it since I saw it on Cinemax.
Oh man,
you know what I mean.
We're gonna have to watch that after this.
Maybe. Tupac's great in it, and Tupac is a classically trained actor and performer.
Maybe after some herb.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's gonna take some chorusing.
Yeah, I think Tupac's best movie that he made was Gridlocked with Tim
Gridlocked,
Roth.
yeah, that was a good one.
But I do think that Bullet...
That's what I was thinking of. That's the movie I was thinking of.
Oh,
they
is
try
it
to stab
really?
each other, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that scene where they're trying to get to the hospital? They try to stab each other.
They're trying to... That's all about, like, cutting through red tape and trying to get treatment that you deserve.
Right.
And doing whatever it takes to do that. But we're getting off track. So.
A little bit, yeah. But it's a good movie, and it came out around the same time.
Yeah.
And then Double Team came out, and I do want to talk a little... The reason why I want to talk about Double Team a little bit is not because of Dennis Rodman or Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Okay.
Both of them deserve a Retrospectoid episode themselves. If not, talking about Rodman during Chicago Bulls episode, but definitely talk about
Jean-Claude.
Jean-Claude Van Damme has a very special place in my heart.
Really?
Yeah, he.
That's surprising to me.
And
Todd?
It goes back to the cheesy movies that of youth.
What were they? I can't even remember.
Bloodsport,
yeah.
Cyborg.
Okay.
Shit, now I'm trying to think of the other ones.
There's one big one I'm thinking.
Yeah,
I can't put my finger on.
It was that post-apocalyptic one.
Bloodsport's cool though. That's a cool one.
Yeah, they're not great movies. It's just that,
obviously not.
But I also like the story of anyone who makes it in the industry who's not. Arnold is one good example, but Rourke in that movie played a villain, and you'll start to see this pattern start to come out of this, is that he realized, I can be true to myself, I can be real, I can be authentic, because the bad guys are the most authentic, the bad guys are the most real, they have to be in order, they can't be the hero who's like, full of morality and all that shit. Right. So he was able to and then he could be as eccentric as he wanted, because bad guy, and you watch Double Team, he's super eccentric in that movie. We'll cut to a clip right now of just some random scene from
Please don't.
Yeah, no, it's happening. So anyway, there's that scene. It's pretty ridiculous. The dialogue's bad. I mean, you're getting a non-actor like Dennis Rodman performing with a guy who doesn't speak English very well.
Yeah, but you know one thing about Double Team, it was supposed to be like a Jean-Claude Van Damme with Rourke playing the bad guy, and then Rodman signed on late to save the film, and they finally got some money backers and things. So Rourke, I feel like a lot of what he had to contribute to that film got just axed and cut out.
Yeah, so there's Double Team. I know probably people wouldn't spend that much time talking about it. And then there was another 9.5 Weeks, which... Don't watch this movie.
So I own this film on DVD still now, which, by the way, is hard
DVD.
It's hard to even find. I bet you can't find it.
No.
So on just DVD, I mean, you might be able to stream it on YouTube, but... So if you own this movie, here's my recommendation. So turn down the volume completely. And put on music of your choice, like have an alcoholic beverage and spend time with your significant other. Yeah. And just enjoy the scenery.
Right.
Or just enjoy the ambiance.
Just put on some porn in the background.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't just,
Watching Mickey Rourke, struggle through these scenes with, what was her name? I can't
remember.
Jacqueline something or other.
Yeah.
You know what? It is what it is.
It is what it is. It exists.
It exists. I think he was quoted in like an interview saying when he was on his way to film that, he had just had some plastic surgery to correct some cheekbone thing. So he was in so much pain, and he was just like, oh God, let me get this paycheck. So that's pretty much all you need.
And then, of course, Thin Red Line, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but he that was in 1998.
I wish I could see that. I wish I could see his scenes.
Me too. I'm a huge Terrence Malick fan.
You'll never see that, though.
No. Terrence Malick buried that shit in the bottom of the ocean.
And Rourke was very offended by that. If you look at his interviews around that time, he was like, I thought I put in some really good work.
Right. And knowing Terrence Malick, there's a good reason for him to cut that out. And it probably has nothing to do with Rourke's performance.
It probably had more to do with the story
pacing,
and moving it along.
Yeah, and I can support that, but I can totally see an ego being hurt because like everybody wants to be in a Malick film, you know what I mean? And like,
well, especially since then Rourke really needed a resurgence.
He did, and I feel like a Malick film would have done that for him, you know, because Malick was already, you know, fucking, he was like, you know, Kubrick and Lynch at that time, and even now, you know, he can make some really shitty movies now, and people will watch them like me. Yeah, so Thin Red Line's a great movie. You should watch that. It's a great movie just for character acting. It's a character-driven movie, which is kind of ironic that they cut him out. And also in, let's see here. Sorry, this is the point where I just kind of lose interest in his career.
Of course.
He did some other smaller films. Animal Factory.
Which is actually a good movie.
Was directed and written by Steve Buscemi.
Steve Buscemi, and it's actually a good movie.
It's a good movie. It's a great movie.
And Rourke also, for that film, he played a transvestite. I mean, what is the correct?
He plays a transgendered person.
Transgender.
Yeah, transvestite's not really a term that's used anymore because it doesn't exist. That's what we would call we would call it.
This is Alec being insensitive.
It's Alec just not knowing.
But,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Now he knows. It's funny. It's like a conversation about Rourke to distinguish the difference between transvestite and transsexual. But that one of the things that might touch a chord with a lot of people was in 2001 he played the main villain in Enrique Iglesias' video for Hero, which to me I remember seeing the video and being like, whoa, who's that guy? It seems like they're giving him a really big role. Like, why is he such a big deal? Like, obviously he's playing the bad guy.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you know, at the
it's
time,
like hardcore bad guy battle.
Yeah, typical. This song's about, you know, this song's called Hero.
Be my hero, baby.
Right, and that song was ubiquitous everywhere, and it's a lovely song. Now that I can look at it, you know, look back on it, I should say, because at the time
Yeah.
Jennifer Love Hewitt's in that. You guys probably don't know who that is, but she she's a ghost whisperer now. Or the Medium or whatever. She had she was really big around that time. I feel like that was the last big thing she did for a while. And so he was in that, and that's going back to the whole idea of him playing villains.
It's also going back to the idea of him taking a paycheck.
Him taking a paycheck and him playing a villain. So you could fall into something really easy, and I know that for me, as somebody who has dabbled in acting, I love playing villains because they're easy to play. Especially when you're just there to look gritty and like hold a gun, you know, in these really lovely scenes. It's a very well-directed video. And now we're going to get into the time where Mickey Rourke was starting to make some really decent movies because he was deified in a way, or at least elevated to the status of being mythic now.
Well, I think honestly a lot of the directors and creative people in the industry were young people now.
Yeah,
and they were people who had grown up watching Rourke and loving him in that old stuff.
Totally.
And so they didn't give a fuck now about, you know, his effect on the industry and, you know, like his rebellion period.
But Brad Pack, any of that shit, yeah, it was all.
They were just like, I love this dude, man. Can we get this guy? Yes.
And whether it was by choice or not, his reinvention is what led to that. The face stuff and the boxing stuff and everything was all just kind of allowing him to get to this point where he literally reinvented himself.
Yeah.
And now I want to talk about Spun. 2002 brought us it's a meth-addled story of. Maybe it's a love story.
I actually really like Spun.
I like Spun a lot, and I like it for a lot of reasons. And I just think it's funny that he contrasted his big role of being the bad guy in this pretty little music video to this very...
Spun's almost like a music video.
Spun, I mean, he did music videos, right? Jonas Ackerman.
That's all he did.
That's all he did. So it really is... I mean, there's not much of a story there.
No.
Barely a story,
Not
barely
really.
Characters, but...
there are characters.
There's
characters with no story.
But I mean, like, if you look
at characters,
I think the most interesting character in that movie is probably Debbie Harry's character.
I don't know, man. I think the other Coppola boy, Jason Schwartzman.
Yeah, that was around the time that I was just like.
Wasn't his character kind of like the main dude?
He was the main character of the movie.
And didn't he kind of have a little bit of an arc, like?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's still. I think there's parts of it that are more than a music video. But
we should listen to like a Rourke scene in Spun where he's like with Brittany Murphy.
Yeah,
Rest in peace.
and I think that he plays this character that literally is like a myth.
The cook.
Yeah, he plays Paul Bunyan in this fucking movie where he's like this mysterious dude, you know.
Makes this wonderful meth.
Yeah, he makes this wonderful meth that people love, and he's full of all these like beautiful things to say, and there are these like these very deep kind of weird things, but are also like crusty and gross. And
They're all gross.
Yeah, and I think that's actually probably the best way to describe Spun is that it's like, you know, full of all these pretty things, but it's just generally crusty and gross.
Yeah. Hey, shout out to Billy Corgan though. A couple good songs in that soundtrack.
Yeah, some really good stuff.
Like
I remember
this
that
Juan thing, like Love to Love You.
And he was in the movie too, and he's pretty, you know, he's only in like a flash of a scene, but I mean, like, you know,
Love to Love You is a beautiful
It's a
song.
great song. And also that movie is the movie that turned me on to Donovan, because Hurdy-Gurdy Man plays in that scene where they're driving and it's the
Really?
headlights. And I heard that song and I was like, what? Because I remember at that time
That
too.
turned you on to Donovan?
Well, a movie came out called Lie, L-I-E, which
Yeah, I
is a
saw
Long
that.
Island Expressway.
I saw it.
Interesting movie. Paul Dano's first movie, who I think is a great actor. I love that guy. And
Young boy, like molestation.
well, it's
adult,
like yeah,
sexual,
it's like such a
like,
weird. It's
thing.
the same thing as like Spun and like and Gummo and all these movies that touch upon these things that make people feel really uncomfortable. And maybe
I owned Lie.
Lie's. I did too, and Lie's a
Yeah.
really good movie. But that movie also had Hurdy-Gurdy Man in it during the trailer, and I was like, and so I remember at that time I heard both of them. I was still in high school. I was a sophomore then. And I was like, what is this crazy weird song that, you know, starts out with this really weird, like, whatever. And
My love for Donovan came from Rules of Attraction.
Yeah, that movie
When there
too,
was
yeah.
that one song which was
Yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yellow is the color of my baby's hair.
And that's a great movie too.
In the morning.
Totally. This was like, in my opinion, this was like the resurgence of movies that actually gave a shit about movies.
Right.
And the people were taking chances on films, and so Spun was one of them that I can watch that movie and be fine with it. I actually owned a VHS copy of that movie.
I still have the DVD right now.
Yeah, I think I had a DVD copy of it for a while, but I had like a burned copy of it, but I had it on VHS.
Todd and I are gonna watch this after this.
Yeah, after we watch the other movie that we said we're gonna watch.
We're gonna watch Wild Orchid.
Yeah.
Spun.
And Double Team.
Bullet. Double Team. Like, we're not sleeping tonight.
No. In fact, we might actually go get some meth somewhere. I don't even know who the antagonist of Spun was. It was just themselves. It was meth.
It was themselves.
Yeah,
It was meth.
yeah.
Yeah, it was meth.
So many good. I'm just now reminded of that scene where the cops go. Where what's his name? What's the actor's name?
But remember the scene where Rourke is driving back at the end of the movie?
Yeah.
And he's in the passenger seat and he's talking about his mother and how she killed all these puppies.
Right.
And she drowned all these puppies.
Yeah.
And I feel like that entire scene is Rourke, period. Like, he either wrote that or he improvised that. That's him, period. I know enough about the guy to know that's him.
Yeah.
And then when he walks into the end and he gets blown up at the end of the film, spoiler.
It reminds you of that Neil Young song. You know, it's like it's better to burn out than to fade away. You know what I mean? And he did in that
film.
movie, and he's
in that film.
And
Yeah, for sure.
and he's kind of in the process of doing that now in real life.
Well, maybe he's fading away.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, in 2003, he did Once Upon a Time in Mexico, directed by Robert Rodriguez. I know a lot of people hated it, and it's not a great movie. I liked it. It was entertaining. I remember this is around the time Spy Kids was becoming a really big thing, so I was like, cool, he's doing some really cool stuff. Oh,
yeah.
El Mariachi, another movie, cool.
Well,
but,
definitely.
You know, Johnny Depp's in it, and like, you know, and he's not the...
I think Once Upon a Time in America is a bit of a mess. That's just me, but...
It is a mess, and it's messy, if anything.
Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time in Mexico...
it's a bit of a mess.
But it's entertaining, for some.
To an extent.
Yeah, in 2004, he did Man on Fire, which, to be honest, I was like, that came out in 2004? Like, man, it hit me in the gut. I was like, I'm fucking
I think
old.
Man on Fire was a really good movie.
To another Tony Scott film, yeah.
Tony Scott, yeah, I think that's actually the best Tony Scott film.
It's one of them, yeah. I think, you know, he's a great director, and it's a sad loss. I remember when he died, that was a really big deal. And
it was really sad.
So that was 2004. I was a senior in high school then. Remember, everybody was really into Man on Fire.
Yeah.
Dakota Fanning was everywhere. Denzel Washington was writing. This was just before? No, this was after Training Day.
Yeah, and I feel like that was a big movie for Denzel because he was playing like this old, washed-out guy, I don't think he'd ever played that before.
He was reinventing himself. Yeah.
Yeah, he was taking an off ramp in his career, and he was the older guy who was very flawed, very jaded.
Right.
I didn't know whether to like him or not like him in that film, and then as it grew, obviously he was Denzel, the hero.
Right.
Rourke in that film is interesting too. He's only in a couple scenes, and he's not really a significant factor. But I think he actually, if you listen to the director commentary from Tony, he talks about Rourke and how he actually took notes from Rourke about some scenes, and I think I don't know. I think Mickey was an important part of that set.
At this point, I kind of think that Mickey Rourke is almost like Saffron.
Yeah.
In that you only need a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's probably too expensive to have anyways. Especially now. Mickey Rourke's probably hell expensive to put in a movie.
I just saw him the other day in
on the street.
Andrew Dice Clay. No, I wish. Andrew Dice Clay has his own show on Showtime now called Dice.
Oh, God.
And Rourke was actually... No, it's actually good.
It's funny. It is. I'm sure
it's
it
actually
is.
funny. Rourke was actually in an episode, and it was kind of sad for me to see.
And then he did the biggest role that he's done in the past 20 years, and I mean that by popularity and by know-how, which is Sin City, another Robert Rodriguez film. And Sin City, everybody knows about it. I don't really need to say much about it, but what Mickey Rourke brought to that character of Marv, he was designed for that character. You know what I mean? Like, perfect casting, perfect everything. This jaded, grim dude who finds something good in his life and it gets taken away, and then he has to fight for it or get revenge. And
imagine him shooting those scenes on that green screen. Just trying to give it everything he had to try to get back in this shit, And
he brought complexity to. I mean, Frank Miller's so. I don't need to even build him up because he's amazing, and the characters that he did create were really good. What Rourke was able to do was he was able to be a filter for that. He was able to take in the source material, which were just words, right, and images, and he took that into himself and he made it his own, which is what method acting is all about. And then he created this character Marv, who is an amalgamation of purely Rourke and also the character that was created. That was
also an interesting part about Sin City is when Frank Miller saw Rourke's scenes as Marv, that's when he was fully on board and said, okay, I went myself to this.
Yeah.
Because he became that character, and he really put in so much effort and so much, he had a feeling of Marv.
Right. And that movie's all about feeling because, first of all, it's shot all in front of blue screens, and second of all, I mean, looking back,
the dialogue is kind of paper thin.
Yeah, it's pulpy.
So it's the feeling, it's the tone, and Rourke was that tone.
Totally. Looking back on Sin City, I love that movie. That movie.
I do too.
He was great in that movie, and then he was also in Domino, which is also another movie, another Tony Scott movie.
I like Domino.
I remember you liked Domino.
I know Domino's a mess. I know that, and I know it's not a good film. Okay, I realize that. However, I still enjoy watching Domino. I enjoy watching the film. I like the scenes. I like Rourke out there spitting spittle out of his face and just going out with a shotgun and blasting people and just. I like the scenes, and I like the feeling.
Right, and the biggest flaw to that movie wasn't Mickey Rourke and it wasn't Tony Scott. The biggest problem with that movie is that they approved a movie about a supermodel that turned into an assassin. There really wasn't much there outside of just that. And so that's the reason why the movie wasn't great, and that's the reason why the movie failed. But the things that were great about it, I felt like, Keira Knightley's pretty good in it. She's always decent.
She's good.
She's a good actress.
She's good.
She's like the poor man's Rachel Weisz.
Come on, dude.
I'm just kidding.
Come on.
Just kidding.
They're different people.
They are different people. And honestly, Rachel Weisz is a total, not a really great person to work with. So he did Domino. Okay, decent. I remember I didn't want to watch the movie because the trailers were super annoying and she said her name over and over again.
Well, also the film, the choices that Tony Scott made with the cinematography.
I feel like the studio was like, we need sepia. You need to up the sepia. We need the contrast really high.
I want shaky cameras.
I want can we get a 13-year-old with ADHD to
Can we get handheld camera the whole movie?
Yeah, handheld the whole thing. Edit the shit out of it.
Put a filter on it. Let's put an After Effects.
I feel like the movie could have been saved if you removed a lot of those layers.
It probably could have been saved if you did a lot of different things.
And then we have Killshot, 2008, based on an Elmore Leonard novel.
Man, I wish that was something better than it was.
Me too.
I really, because what you're talking about a Leonard again, who Jackie Brown. But also, though, the kill shot, what was a big disappointment for me is because as a big fan of Mickey Rourke and a big fan of Leonard and a big fan of great cinema, I built myself up to really get into this and like, this is going to be big. This is going to be, you know, the resurrection of Rourke, and
right.
But then it turned out it was filmed like 2 years before they even like released it. I don't even know if it saw like a theater audience. Like,
I remember seeing trailers for it, and I just remember hearing about like the fact that they've been sitting on it for a long time, like that
way
movie
too long, which is
Yeah.
never a good sign. And the director of the film had won an Academy Award for Best Director.
Right. Well, we're in the early aughts, the time where the science of trying to figure out what the best way of getting audiences in the theater was now a fixed thing. There's algorithms now written to design all this stuff, and so there's a reason a studio is going to sit on a project if they feel like it's not the right time to release a film.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it will ever be in a time where you can release a film where it'd be like, well, I'm just gonna do a raw Elmore Leonard film,
and also, let's face it, it's not that great of a movie.
It's not, and
like,
the source material's not that great either.
Diane Lane hooked back up with Mickey Rourke in this film, which is we talk about back to Rumblefish, so that's a little interesting.
There's a connection
tidbit.
there, yeah.
Yeah, disappointing all around. Just it's disappointing.
The Wrestler. Counterpoint to Rumblefish, The Wrestler is to me the other bookend to this career, and I know he's done stuff afterwards, but to me it's the thesis of the thing that really speaks to me about Rourke now.
It's kind of his redemption story.
Yeah, and and so you go from this movie Rumblefish, where he's this young dude embodying this idea of like nihilism, and then you have this other character who is the byproduct of that. You have a character who's the ass end of that lifestyle, who can't pay his rent, who is part of this industry that's killing him, who is performing to people who want something out of him that he just doesn't want, can't give. And that's all performance. And they always say that Black Swan and The Wrestler are kindred spirits because they're all about what performance does to people and what being on the spotlight's all about.
And I think having Darren Aronofsky at the helm for Rourke gave him once again that artist that he could respect and would actually give his. And
if you ever heard an interview with Darren Aronofsky, he just sounds like some New York cab driver, what I mean? But that's relatable, and that's part of like why I think Rourke working with him is so well. I love Darren Aronofsky. I love his movies. I my favorite is The Fountain.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't like that movie. That's fine. And
I like Black Swan a lot.
I think a lot of people, and I think a lot of people, his movies, I think you kind of have to like go back and look at them and be like, okay, well, because they're very glossy and pretty, and people take that for face value, and there's some value to that. But then when you go back and look at the underlying stuff, you're like, whoa. And
there's a lot of press that Rourke did for The Wrestler because I actually got some acclaim and some
it was
credence in the award scene, and
what most people would consider to be his comeback would have been The Wrestler,
right? Yeah. And if you listen to some of that press, I would say that an underlying theme is that he worked with someone that he really respected, and that he was able to kind of put as like a coach in his mind, like he's my coach, I'm the star athlete, I'm gonna do what he needs me to do, I'm gonna work within his system and create what he wants me to produce.
Right.
And I think he did that in that film, and I think that it was a collaborative effort. But I think overall, like, you could look back to Rumblefish, you could look back to Angel Heart, you could look back to Barfly, you could look back to even Pope of Greenwich Village, where he's working with someone that he respects, and so he's going to now give it all. He's going to be a pawn to their chess master.
Right.
He only did that in select points in his career, in select films, and the films in which he did that are the films that we want to talk about, that are worth talking about.
Right. And the thing with The Wrestler too is that movie's really what that movie's about is Americana, and it's about looking beneath all the layers and looking at it honestly and what Americana does to our idols, or what Americana does to industries like wrestling.
Sacrifices, overindulgence.
Yeah, and there's human lives that come out at the end of those things, and this wrestler. Biggest thing for me out of that film was it was talking about masculinity. Pretty much all of Mickey Rourke's movies talk about masculinity, but Rumblefish especially talks about young masculinity, and then the wrestler talks about older masculinity. Your value is gone.
They're not that different.
And they're like, that's why I think that they talk to each other so well. You know, the wrestler Mickey Rourke's character is just so exploited,
and he's so damaged.
But he's also a byproduct of his own masculinity.
He is, but he's so embarrassing in a way. You know,
that's the point, right? It's supposed to show you, like, yeah,
right. And same way, it's like, you got this big, strong, masculine guy, and he's supposed to be like the hero, but he's broken, and he's embarrassing, and he's flawed and jaded, and he's a terrible father, you know? He's so many things that go beyond, that chip into that, like, exterior thing that you think of like a strong male is, you know? And it goes so much deeper into that, and you're right. I mean, I never thought of it, but Rumblefish is like similar.
It's very similar, and you know, and both movies, I think, if you're ever going to watch any of Rourke's films, in my personal opinion, if you're going to watch two of them, you should watch those two.
Watch Rumblefish and The Wrestler, and try to come to grips with that they're the same guy.
Yeah, they're not only the same guy, it'll also put a lot of his movies in perspective. Definitely shouldn't watch some of the shittier ones. But in 2011, this is something I learned doing research on this podcast, is that he actually began pre-production on a Gareth Thomas story that many of you guys might not know, but Gareth Thomas was a rugby player who came out in 2008. And he was one of the first athletes at the time to start the visibility of LGBTQ plus celebrities and athletes started to become a bigger thing. Obviously, we had some before that. But that's something that just goes to show that Rourke is the kind of guy that wouldn't be afraid of playing a character like that. Instead, he would see the value, and he would see the courage and the grit of somebody who had to not only be in the rugby world, but also had to, you know, eventually
overcome so many obstacles.
Yeah.
And I'm so sad that never came about. In fact, I don't think it ever will, and the reason being, I think, in a major part, is that, I mean, Rourke is too old to be playing that part, but I think in his own mind, like, he was going to do that, and that was going to be his next big project, and it never, you know, actually materialized. And I think since then, we've seen Rourke, unfortunately, go back to a lot of projects that he does for money, you know, which is, hey, pay the bills, it's fine.
Right.
He did one movie recently called Ashby, which I think is actually a decent film, with Nat Wolff being like a high school kid who's writing like a report about his neighbor, which turns out to be Rourke, and an ex, like, you know, CIA type of guy and whatnot. And I think there's some good scenes in there where you can see kind of Rourke showing what he can do. But overall, it's been kind of a sad decline since The Wrestler.
Totally, and I think the decline actually comes a lot from, you know, Iron Man 2. Rourke did a lot of he did too much research on putting himself into that character, and then they ended up editing him down into this very simplistic bad guy, and
they cut his scenes way down.
And that was like the major reason why he took that role, is because he said, I don't want to play a one-dimensional bad guy. And they said, well, we'll let you add. The only thing they kept was the bird.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? That was his thing. That was his invention.
It all was, like, everything. But
yeah, there was nothing to that character, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he turned it into something and they cut it down, but what did he expect? It's a Hollywood big movie, and it's not about him.
I think he, you know, he got complacent, and he relearned what he learned before, and that's what, you know, if you need to make money, then you shouldn't do artistic pieces. You should just do whatever, you know. And what some people do is they do commercials, or they do TV, and for work sometimes that's, you know, doing double team. And then also he had a 2014 return to boxing, and this is where we'll talk about the Elliot Seymour boxing match, which was later revealed to be
a hoax.
It was a hoax. The fight was fixed. Whether or not Rourke knew about it or not is not really up for debate here. The fact of the matter is that it wasn't a real fight.
It threw some guy in there to get his ass beat by Rourke.
Yeah, and they were banking off his celebrity from, the wrestler and stuff. And it's pretty sad.
For everyone.
For everyone involved, yeah. There's
including him.
TKO second round. I mean, like, if you're somebody who believes in what you can achieve through boxing and then have something like that happen, it's such that would destroy me. And also his brother passed away, I believe in 2011, and Joey was a big part of his life. Rourke was actually considering suicide around this time. He was actually thinking about killing himself, and the only thing that kept him alive was his brother.
And maybe his dogs.
Yeah, and maybe, and that's
Loki.
Another thing that I actually forgot to write down in my notes that I wanted to talk about was the dogs. But
it's another just aspect of this big macho guy who's carrying around this small little like Chihuahua pug mix. Like,
whether that's like contrived or not, I think is unimportant. Whether that's forced or not. I
don't think it's forced.
Who knows?
He's an animal lover.
Yeah, he talks about how, like, he relates to them because he can provide them kindness and they can return kindness in return, and it's a very simplistic relationship that he appreciates. And I can see that, and I can attest to that because I also have pets. But yeah, it also adds to the persona that we get now with Mickey Rourke. Now that he's an older, crustier man, this is the last chapter of this podcast, is that we get some very strange decisions from Rourke, not just professionally but also personally. He's imbued himself into he's a Republican. I don't know how long he's been a Republican, but he's had some very.
I know he said if he could vote for George W. Bush
he
twice,
loved him.
He would have.
He loved him.
Yeah. So but also I feel like there's been maybe a veer away from that recently because he's had a lot of anti-Trump things to say. So
I don't know what
he hates Donald Trump. So
not that Mickey Rourke should be a metric or anything, a rubric to understand the politics of the world, but that's something that's part of him as just being a human being now, which is that like he's just allowed to be like this bloated dude in a pink tracksuit with a bunch of little dogs. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm happy with that.
It's probably similar to him making the statements he made about the IRA.
Right.
It's an uninformed dude who just kind of gets a feeling about something and then takes a stance that he hasn't really thought through or doesn't know much about.
And going back to that Piers Morgan interview, one thing that he talks about in the interview is that he realizes that he's part of the problem. And that's one thing that I always say is the biggest measure in my mind of an adult is when you can openly and honestly say, I've been a part of every single problem in my life, and I will continue to be a part of problems in my life. And if I don't address that, and if I don't look at that honestly, I'm never going to grow as a human being. I think that with Rourke, and with that self-realization, and with all the mistakes that he made, a lot of his mistakes align with his personal needs to just not compromise. And that's something that really, I wasn't a huge fan of Mickey Rourke before this podcast, to be honest with you. I respected him and I liked his work, and I mostly liked the movies for what they were as stories. But now that I've learned a lot more about him as a person, I think that there's a lot more respect I have for him, and that need to not compromise, and that need to be authentic. And those are two things that in society now we deal with on a daily basis. We have inauthenticity every single day. We have, people not working for what they want. They just, they want the world catered to themselves. And
right.
And so with Rourke, it's like that. To me, authenticity is always going to be number one for me.
And if you listen to any interview that he's done recently, or even in the last 10 years, one thing you will walk away is saying this guy is brutally honest and authentic.
I think that he finally realized that he was that beta fish, and I think that he was that Rumblefish, and that really the biggest thing holding himself back was his reflection. And that to me is the root of Mickey Rourke as a human being. And that's something we all have to learn as human beings, but as a man in this society, I feel like that was the number one thing that really helped me to kind of get my shit together, was that I realized the only thing that's holding me back is me, and the only thing that's holding back everybody is themselves.
Hear, hear. And one thing you can say is, looking back at Rourke and who he was as an actor, you won't see that again. You don't see that from anyone. He's one of a kind. And we can leave it at that. Cheers to Mickey.
Yeah, here's to Mickey.
After a while, things that you believe in, later on, you see it for what it really is, like kind of like an illusion.